Welcome to Consider This, where thoughts and conversations come together. My name is Barry Wright, and I'm at Brock University, and today we have a conversation that's going to be helping children with reading challenges learn how to read. And on your left-hand side, I have John McNamara. John is a professor in the Department of Child and Youth Studies here at Brock University, and he's an educational psychologist. And on your right is Ashley Short, and Ashley is the Executive Director of the Learning Disability Association of Niagara, the Niagara region. And we're going to talk, as I say, about helping children read. And so maybe we'll start off with you, Ashley, if you could tell us a little bit about what your organization does here in Niagara.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Barry. So we're, as Barry mentioned, we're the Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara Region. So our provincial body is the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario. And as the local chapter here in Niagara, currently what we're mostly doing is supporting children living with a learning disability across the region through various programs that we'll probably talk about through our time here today. A lot of direct impact programming around reading and reading support, as that seems to be a great need that the children need. And we're supporting kids as young as age 4, all the way up pretty much to 16 years old. Again, mostly in their reading, but we also have programs that support children with their social skills and self-advocacy skills and executive functioning and things of that nature. We have a great partnership with John, which I think we'll get into today, around how we research those programs.
Maybe just as a follow-up question, how challenging is reading disabilities in Niagara? Do you have a insight for our audience today?
It's a great question. We certainly know that our phones ring a lot in the office, and we hear a lot from educators from both the public and Catholic school boards here, but we hear a lot from parents who are looking for support. Many of the kids that we see are not diagnosed with a learning disability, but the school may have identified them of having a potential learning disability, but certainly a child who is struggling with their reading. And I mean, we certainly see kids that are in grade 4 reading at a grade 2 level or lower. So there's a great need, and in the past 5 years, we've really grown, especially our reading programs, quite a bit to serve a large number of kids. And to give you a little bit more of an idea, one thing that we know is there's approximately 2 kids in every classroom with a learning disability. So the need is definitely there.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So, John, when we look at reading programs and your research in particular in this area, perhaps you can give us some insights, and in particular about your Reading Rocks program.
Sure, yeah, happy to be here. As Ashley mentioned, we've had a research partnership between myself and my research team and Ashley's organization for quite some time. We've known quite a bit about reading and reading disabilities in the field of research for some time. We know what kids who are vulnerable readers require. We know that there's some foundational skills that are very good predictors of how well a child's going to read in the long term. These things are things such as letter sound understanding and the ability to blend words together, sight word vocabulary. These are all very important skills when it comes to reading, and the research field has been well aware of this for quite some time, and any good program is really founded on these foundational skills. Reading Rocks, the program that has been developed for quite some time. We developed it about 10 years ago, and now we partner with the Learning Disabilities Association to offer this program, is certainly based on this idea that children who require support with reading require support with some very foundational skills. I think that what makes Reading Rocks unique is that it takes this a little further. And what I mean by that is we know that children who are vulnerable readers also typically don't enjoy reading too much. It's something that I think we all experience when we're struggling with something. We're not typically motivated to engage with it. We've built Reading Rocks based on this idea to not only teach some foundational skills, but to really try to engage our kids and to motivate them to want to read. The way that we've done that is by building motivational tactics into the Reading Rocks program. So if you were to see this program, you would be seeing kids chart their progress, set goals for themselves, work with their tutors individually to meet these goals. And when they meet these goals, they're simply feeling good about themselves and feeling good about a task that they've really been challenged with. And then all of a sudden, when they're feeling good about it, they're more motivated to engage in it. So our research around this has really been studying not only the foundational skills, but also how impactful those motivational tactics can be.
I'm sure it's been a while since many of our audience members have learned, remember how they learned to read. But I was wondering, Ashley, if maybe you might be able to tell us a little bit about your experience with children as they develop the skills, and what would we look in as a parent to see if our child was having a challenge reading?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and it's one that many parents ask. And I don't want parents to stress over it, because reading is a complex process for all of us. Parents' intuition's usually right. So if early on they think that their child might be a little bit behind, even in those early literacy skills, I would say a good step is to check with the teacher and communicate with the school to see if they think that the child might be behind. You definitely want to be looking, does the child know their letter names and letter sounds? And then moving beyond that, maybe looking at grade 2, grade 3, how is the child blending those sounds together? So that dog example, again, that John, I remember giving in his class the one time, it was such a good one, and it sticks with me, because some people ask, what does a learning disability look like? Or what does a reading disability look like when if my child's struggling potentially with one, or if I'm a teacher in the classroom, what do I look for? And so you ask the child to read the word dog, and you start by saying, what sounds do these letters make? And they say, hopefully, d, a, g. Great. Okay, let's blend those sounds together. And what word is that? And they go, d, a, g. Great. You know those sounds really well. Can we stretch at those sounds and tell me what that word is? And they go, d, a, g. And this is where we find children with reading disabilities seem to really struggle. It's manipulating those sounds and putting them together to read the whole word. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly something to look at. But again, it's so crucial to get to these kids early on. I don't want parents to stress, but definitely in kindergarten, do they know their letter names? Do they know their letter sounds? If not, can you expose them to it more, and can they pick up on it? Can they learn nursery rhymes? So really just paying attention to those things, making sure they're exposed to it, and checking in with the teacher, I think, is important for parents.
Okay. Well, for those parents that are tiger parents that really want the children to read very, very early, before even maybe they get into the school system and things, John, with your research background, is there an appropriate age that children should start thinking about this?
That's also a good question. We know that reading starts before school. In the past number of years, we've really focused on this idea called emergent literacy. And the emergent literacy stage is one that starts at birth. So it's almost considered kind of birth to age 6. From the research background, we know that there's many good early predictors of later reading challenges. So Ashley and I, in our programs, I know that the LDA has some...
LDA?
Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara.
Sorry, thank you.
The Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara has some programs aimed at prevention. Ashley and I firmly believe that prevention is what we're about, that we can kind of get a hold of this trajectory. If there is going to be some reading challenges, we get a hold of that trajectory as early as possible. Yeah. What do we work on with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old? We work on what you think we work on. At that age, kids are starting to learn their letters and their letter sounds. And again, sound tasks, like putting sounds together. One of our great predictors we call phonological processing. And a phonological processing task would be saying the word hat without the t sound in it. So the correct answer to that would be ha. That task is a good predictor of how, the foundations of reading. And as Ashley mentioned, we have to be really careful in saying a child who's a little bit behind in those is at risk for a reading disability, because we know that kids develop at different rates and different stages. So it's a tricky business dealing with prevention. So I think that the answer there is to simply just keep an eye on things. And if your kid is a little bit behind in their letter sounds and their sound blending, as Ashley mentioned, that we have programs, and the Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara has programs that can help our kids kind of get up to speed, as does our school system.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, I think while we're on that area of supporting young kids, one thing you'd see in our Reading Rocks Junior program, and what you're seeing in the kindergarten classrooms around here now too, is it's very play-based. So again, if you're working with your children at home, it doesn't mean, you know, drilling them when they're 3 years old with their letter names and letter sounds. It doesn't mean your grade 4 child or student should be reading or practicing their reading for an hour every single night. I think with all of our programs, you want to keep it fun and motivate, and you can do that. So if you come into our early intervention literacy program with 4 to 6 year olds, they're playing Go Fish for letter sounds or sight words, and they don't think they're at a reading program.
Right.
They're having lots of fun, and I think research tells us that we know that children learn best through play.
Well, one of the things that is quite different, obviously, from when I learned to read, but just the electronics. And so I look at my little guy and how much it's on there. I'm just wondering if you could bring, have you found that that is an added value or a hinder now, a lot more visual, like auditory learning in games and things, as opposed to the reading aspect and things? Have you found that's been impacting the youth now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we're in a technological age, so there are a number of different IT programs that are supportive of reading, and they all do what a non-tech-based program would do, except in a tech environment, and a lot of kids are motivated to that. One of the things that we always talk about is, I mean, there's no trick to reading. There's a straightforward process through the reading. And how you get there, you may get there in different ways, through a program like Reading Rocks or a technological program. But learning to read is learning to read. When it comes to reading disabilities, and we may think about that as a particular neurologically based processing problem, actually. But when we think about that, I get a little nervous with tech programs in that I think there's almost no better substitute for a child who has a processing problem to be working individually with a tutor or someone who knows what they're doing, who can really try to straighten out that processing problem as much as we can. And I think Ashley might agree with me that we haven't seen a computer-based program that can do that quite as well as for instance, a tutor or a teacher can do.
Well, I think that leads a little bit into where your research is around this and the stages of reading, and so the electronic isn't going to pick up on that where you say that the tutor might, but could you maybe talk a little bit about those stages of reading ability?
Sure. Both Ashley and I actually, in our whole research team, kind of often characterizes reading as a hierarchy of skills, where at the top of this hierarchy is a mass of comprehension. So we always ask our students, like our university students who are training to be reading educators, like how much comprehension is there in the world? And the answer to that is an infinite amount. It's very big, and these are based on our sentence structure, and then we get down to the words. But when you get down to the bottom of this hierarchy, there's a small number of skills that kids need to be really strong at. And again, they are what we've talked about. They're knowing your letter sounds, knowing that TH make the sound th, and how to put these sounds together in words, and then how to put words together into sentences. And once a child can do that fluently, and we use that word a lot, fluently, this becomes automatic, and it almost triggers this ability to comprehend the infinite amount of information that we have in our kind of text-based worlds. So these stages of reading go from what you see pre-kindergarten to kindergarten as kids learn to read through grade 3 or 4, where they're supposed to have these typically they have these foundational skills intact.
Yeah, and just to add to that, every time John mentions that hierarchy, I always think about how the idea is that you learn those early on skills down at the bottom from, as you said, kindergarten to grade 3, but then after that, and once you get into grade 4, as we all know, you're kind of expected to know how to read well enough to, read a math problem, for example. So you start to see the kids who've struggled with that maybe struggle across subjects because there's so much out there that we have to read, especially in school.
Yeah, we often hear from parents that a very specific reading problem, like the ability to blend, this was a problem with their son or daughter in grade 1 and 2 and potentially even 3. But all of a sudden in grade 4, this problem has kind of bled over into math into art, into science, and now we have this general problem. And it's simply because those curriculum items depend on your ability to read. You may be doing a project in biology on orca whales, but the tasks in that project, maybe a geography or whatever project, but the tasks in it involve reading. So now a very specific problem, if left unattended to, can turn into a very general, hard problem to deal with at the school level.
What are your thoughts about many with their dual languages now, French in particular, in our region? If somebody is struggling in, if you will, their native speaking, how does it compound? How does that work for? Sure,
that's a complicated question. Now, it comes back to this, I think the answer to that comes back to this notion of a processing problem. There has been a lot of cross-cultural studies. The reason I mention that is because if a child has a processing problem, it's not language specific, it's a processing problem. And whether you speak a very different dialect, Cantonese, if there's a processing problem on board, there's a processing problem on board. If you follow that logic, if one has a processing problem in English, one will have a processing problem in French. And then your child is struggling in 2 different languages instead of 1. So we often see parents who, and sometimes a processing problem, we're not sure if that's on board or not, it's hard to tell. But in the cases where we do see children who have a very distinct processing problem and parents are aware of that, and they have been in 2 languages, we often see a parent pull their child out of the language, the second language, and then the process, it's just a little easier to deal with. Another thing we know about these processing problems, they're lifelong.
Okay.
Programs that like Reading Rocks and Ashley's agency do a good job in mediating or moderating these processing problems. When we talk to successful adults at Brock, for instance, who are studying at Brock, who have a severe reading disability, what they say is, this has been here with me for my whole life. I've had support from as early as I can remember, and I'm successful with it. But make no mistake about it, this processing problem has been there. And when you look at the definitions of learning disabilities and reading disabilities, one of the primary characteristics of the definition is it's lifelong.
Okay. Could you maybe just expand a little bit? Give me what a processing problem might be. You talked a little bit about sounding, not being able to link sounds to a word, but what other kind of processing would take place?
Well, I'm just thinking about different, and I'll turn it back over to John, I think, to answer this, but it makes me think about the other learning disabilities. We focus a lot on reading disability or dyslexia, but there's auditory processing disorders, there's children who struggle with their executive functioning skills, there's dysgraphia, there's dyscalculia, but dysgraphia is when a child is struggling with their writing. So instead of the reading, it's the writing. Dyscalculia is their math, so a math LD. And then executive function skills are things like organization skills and things of that nature. Auditory processing is an interesting one. It's not that the child has a hearing problem, but the way they process what they hear is different than you or I, or someone without auditory processing. So again, it just goes to show that there's these different learning disabilities, but it all has to do with that processing piece.
Yeah, and what we know about processing is that it's a brain-based activity. The reason, how we know this from a research idea is we can look at it, and we can look at it through a technology called functional magnetic resonance imaging, or an MRI. Okay. I know that many of our listeners would have had MRIs on their knee or hip or shoulder. There's a technology called functional MRIs where we can look at what's happening in a brain. It's a non-invasive procedure while someone is reading. And we've done this with kids. And when we do this with a grade level reader, what we see is the left side of the brain is working as it should. It's working very hard. It lights up on the scan and it's processing information. The right side of the brain, for a typical reader, isn't doing much during a reading task because we know reading is a left hemispheric activity. A child with a reading disability, or as Ashley's mentioned, another term for this from a research perspective is dyslexia. A child with a reading disability, when they're doing that same task, and an fMRI is imaging what's happening, there's significantly less activation in the left hemisphere. It's not processing as much as it should be.
Mm.
And another unusual finding about that is their right hemisphere is kind of over-processing. And we think of that as it's overcompensating. For the first time, we're venturing into a research project here at Brock, where one of the components of it is we're looking at if we have a child with a reading disability and their right brain is over-processing, if that in itself is a strength that we need to be paying attention to.
So in this, so a little bit of how we're wired, we're hardwired a certain way. And so that could be very frustrating when people are trying to, follow one path when we need to have maybe more of a creative path to afford us to be able to go through the reading.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, so how do you, so if I was thinking as a child then in particular, how do you work with a frustrated right brain child to teach them the analytical left skills? How do you keep them motivated to do such a task?
Yeah, and I think learning to read for everyone isn't really all that different, but something that we need to do with these kids is to make it fun, make it enjoyable, and motivate them. And we have different ways of doing that. So thinking of our Reading Rocks program, many parents say, I'm going to sign my child up for this tutoring program. I'm going to try and get them to come. And then it's only maybe 1 or 2 sessions into it where the child's, asking mom or dad, is it Reading Rocks tonight? And there's a couple of reasons as to why that happens. And I think one is the phenomenal trained tutors that volunteer their time to work with these kids, many of them being Brock students and looking for that hands-on experience. And what they do and the way the program's designed is that they work on those things, the phonics and the sight words and the fluency. We know that that's needed in an effective reading program. But the other piece of it that John has mentioned is the goal setting. So the child sets a realistic goal with the tutor on maybe how many sight words they're going to learn by the next session or master by the next session. And the tutor makes sure that that goal is realistic and the child's either going to meet that goal or surpass that goal. And the child starts seeing their progress in their reading abilities, and they see that all that practice is paying off, and it is making me a stronger reader, and that's motivating to anyone.
Sure.
And that's not happening with these kids maybe in a classroom with a lot of children. So they often feel down about themselves when it comes to reading, whereas in this program we want to make them feel more positive. And I think that intrinsic motivation, because that's another thing, the tutors aren't giving them stickers and prizes for reading lots or reading well. Again, they're graphing their success so that the child can see that they are doing well, and that's intrinsically motivating them.
Yeah, so they get some compensation, if you will, but it's more intrinsic, so they can see that they're moving forward in their path.
Exactly.
So.
And then, what this does is it staves off some of the what the field might call secondary characteristics of a learning disability. And so occasionally we see children who come in whose well-being isn't where we want it to be, and it's from a number of years of struggling in a very reading-based world with a reading-based problem. So as Ashley mentioned, by kind of engaging their motivation and kind of working with them in their own feeling good about themselves, I think Ashley's programs, as much as they are increasing reading skills, they're really increasing well-being is what we're kind of after. And then we've also, as I said, this is a challenge for our kids. And if we understand that lifelong issue, we understand that children can be challenged with this and may need support for their whole lives. But when we look into the field of business and when we look into the field, we see a number of very successful, creative individuals who have very severe reading disabilities. So when you look into the broader field of business and the arts, there's so many possibilities for children to think forward who really may have a left brain processing, but maybe because of this strength maybe that we see with other areas that may be associated with this right brain. We see some very creative people. That's what we're thinking about.
Yeah, I think in our programs what we're there to do is make them feel a little bit better about themselves, work on that well-being, because there definitely is that link between LDs and mental health. We're trying to increase their reading skills. Parents will often say, okay, when can you get them up to grade level? Well, I don't know if we can do that, but we can help with their progress. And then that's that conversation piece around this is going to be lifelong. So many kids have been, they started in our Reading Rocks Junior program, they move into our Reading Rocks program, and we're there providing that literacy or reading support, but then hopefully educating and increasing awareness in Niagara around that other piece that John's talking about and how, it's not all about reading.
We're a very reading-focused society. Our schools are based on reading, and we can get focused there a little bit. So I think it's very healthy for parents of a child with a reading disability to understand that there are more options. And when you look at some of the very successful business people, lawyers, entrepreneurs, they're not reading, but they're doing very well.
Right. So we talked a little bit about the the dog approach, kind of as a bit of a sign. So as a parent, an interested parent, I would just like to, are there a couple other things that I might be able to look at just to sort of gauge a little bit where my young child might be at a reading stages?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on the age of the child. If they're just beginning school or in kindergarten, again, looking at, do they know their letter names? Do they know their letter sounds? Can they print the letters in their name? If they're in kindergarten, grade 1, can they learn a nursery rhyme? If they...
just on that printing, how about letters, reverse lettering?
Right, so we get that, where a parent, maybe a parent who's really on top of it will call us up and say, my 5-year-old is printing their letters, but they're reversing a lot of them, and they'll write their B backwards or their D backwards, and they're a little bit panicked, and we try and calm them down a bit, because that's normal. When we're learning to print, when we're at that stage, 4, 5, even 6 years old, we're just learning that. And if you look at the alphabet and the alphabetic code, the B and the D and the P and the Q are not all that different. So when you're just learning, you can expect your youngsters, I think, to make those reversals. But again, as John mentioned, keep an eye on it.
Right.
So if they're 7, 8, 9 and still doing it, then that might be a sign that there's something more going on. We do know that the early years are very crucial, and providing effective support early on makes a big difference. That being said, I think, it's very important that parents don't feel stress. And it's just, I think if parents are exposing their child to the letters, to the alphabet, in the grocery store saying, can you find all the letter, as many letter S's as you can find. And you've been doing that from an early age, and you're starting to think, that intuition again is saying, I don't think they're where they should be. Talk to the school.
Okay.
Because it is a little bit complex. There's not one quick test that you can do to see if they have a learning disability. And some kids get to grade 1 and they get it. But those early years are important, so you do want to keep an eye on it and talk to the school.
So a parent-teacher interview, or the conversation, right? What kind of questions might a parent ask of their teachers?
Yeah, so depending on the age, but I think as the child enters school or 4, 5, 6 years old, just outright asking, where are they? Are they where you would expect them to be with their letter names and letter sounds? Do you think they're on the right track for becoming a reader? We're not expecting the kids to read in kindergarten, but are they getting those emergent literacy skills that are that important foundation for being a successful reader later on?
I'm thinking as a parental unit, reading with their children, at what point do you shift from reading the story to inviting them into reading with you again?
I think there's probably a natural shift that parents see happening there, and to letting that go. And but as an aside, I honestly think that you're never too old to be read to, and I think reading to your kids is a good idea.
Good.
It's good model reading.
How would you know that somebody, maybe a reader, who has been struggling or whatever, might through? And so I'm thinking with the Reading Rocks, how do you know when they've, now they're excited coming back because they're being successful? What are some of the breakthrough moments or things that you can watch for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we, there's a number of things here. We always see achievement gains, and we collect data and we look at our own achievement gains. I know that Ashley does that with all of her programs. So, I mean, I think one of the things that our caregivers are looking for is that their son or daughter is increasing in their actual reading level. But what's much more rewarding, I think, that we hear is that a child's simply more engaged. Our best stories are when caregivers come back to us and talk about how much more engaged and feeling good about themselves that their child is when they're at school. Like, I think that's the real measure of success when it comes to the Reading Rocks program or any of the other programs that are offered at Ashley's agency.
So if I'm watching our telecast and I'm very interested in maybe getting involved, engaged with your organization or the Reading Rocks and things, how would parents go about doing that?
Yeah, so our full name is the Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara Region, and we have a website. So www.ldaniagara.org is where you can find us. We are updating our website, but everything that is up there lets you know about our programs, how you may want to get involved if you are a parent and may have a child who might be struggling, if you're an educator who wants to understand more as to what we do and who we serve, if you want to volunteer. We are a nonprofit organization, or if you want to support the organization, all of it is up there on the website. And then you can also engage with us on Twitter at LDANR1, and you can engage with us there as well.
Follow you on Twitter, perfect.
Yeah.
Now, the Reading Rocks, so sounds like you have a real program that helps volunteers or educators wanting to learn the particular skills. How would they get involved with you if they're interested in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there's an opportunity with Reading Rocks, and particularly here in the Niagara region, we engage a lot of post-secondary students at Brock or Niagara, and it's a good opportunity for them to further their training and working with an individual child who really needs some support. As Ashley mentioned, our volunteers come into the program through the Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara. So by accessing the website Ashley mentioned, volunteers can also see an intake form there and apply to volunteer for the program.
Okay. Well, I was thinking as well with as an educator, maybe a great program for them to learn more, because if they have two children in their classroom, they are going to need some one-on-one times, and so they'd be able to develop.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we partner with both the local school boards, the public, the District School Board of Niagara and the Catholic School Board. We partner more closely with them every year, so we're really increasing the awareness across the teachers, because these kids are not in a special education class. They're in those general classrooms with those teachers, so educators are often getting in touch with us, whether they're calling us or connecting with us through the email, and we certainly encourage any educator out there who wants to learn more for their students to contact us.
Right. Well, as we just wrap things up, maybe I'll ask final thoughts. Anything you'd like to share with us, John, about from research or Reading Rocks or
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like, I think what we're talking about here is what we know is, approximately 20% of our kids are challenged with reading. Maybe 10% have an identified reading disability. Reading disabilities are difficult to see. They're almost something that's hidden. It's not as clear-cut as maybe some other types of things you'd be looking for. Prevention is the key to this. And if you have a child who is really struggling, I think the take-home message from a research perspective is, we know there's something that can happen. By engaging your child in programs such as Reading Rocks or some of the other programs that Ashley's agency offers or the school offers or anything like that, this isn't the end of the line. There's really something we can do about this. And then, recognizing that also there are a number of strengths that we need to pay attention to with our struggling readers, so that our bottom line is that they grow up to be happy and healthy adults.
Great. So early intervention is very important, but there are lots of things to help them along the journey as well. Ashley.
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing I'd like to just mention is that many of the kids in our programs or that receive support from us are undiagnosed. We don't require an official diagnosis of a learning disability. And one of the reasons being is, at least here in Niagara, many kids go undiagnosed. They're not diagnosed with a learning disability, which is okay. It's a little problematic, but what we're able to do is look for that processing problem to see if it looks like their struggles are coming from that potential learning disability. And I think that's important to know, and to pay attention to what is a learning disability, so what we've been talking about today, And the other exceptionalities that you might think is a learning disability, but it's not that processing problem. So I hope educators out there certainly are increasing their awareness as to what is and what is not a learning disability, and then looking for the effective support. We have many educators here in Niagara who are doing very well at that within the schools, and hopefully that continues. And I'd like to also thank John for continuing to partner with our organization and his research team. It provides us with, it makes sure that we're offering programs that are definitely making a difference and having an impact on the children and their families.
Thank you. Well, today's conversation has been looking at our ability to read, and how, especially for young children, how developing that skill is a really important skill to have. We've been very fortunate to have Ashley join us today, and Ashley's Short is the Executive Director of the Learning Disability Association of Niagara Region, and John McNamara with the Child and Youth Studies here at Brock University. And so it's a wonderful blend where we're able to have practitioners in the field that are really working on an important issue in Niagara, and working with the research teams at Brock University to be able to help make Niagara a great place to live. And so on Consider This, that's been our show for today. Thank you for joining us.